Hello there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar about Kanoa MES, where we're going to be featuring a live demo of the software. So if you met us at ICC this year, a lot of this webinar is inspired from those interactions. If you weren't at ICC, you missed a great show, but don't worry, you didn't miss any prerequisite content for this webinar. We're going to be covering everything much more thoroughly than we did at the conference. So at ICC, we had our booth and we had our tablets, and it was great to show some people on the conference floor how all of this software worked. We also had an exhibitor demo on stage 3 that was a lot of fun, but we only had 30 minutes to give an overview of Kanoa and our philosophy and to do a very quick demo. So the goal for today is for ICC attendees and for new people learning about Kanoa alike, or just our fans that are coming around to support us and see what we're up to. We're going to give a company overview of what it is exactly we do at Kanoa and how we got here. We're going to show off both of our products, Kanoa Ops and Kanoa Quality. But really the goal for today is to have a little bit more of an in-depth session where that demo is really going to be more comprehensive than what we could show at the trade show itself. And then I'm also going to do the thing that we don't always do in these demos, which is I'm going to get into the designer. We're going to make a new asset in Kanoa Ops and wire all that up right here for everybody. One other quick logistical thing, or actually two logistical things before we get started. One is this session is being recorded. It is going to be shared out there with everyone. I don't believe any of your names are attached to it, but if you are particularly concerned about privacy, you shouldn't be on this call. You can always go ahead and watch the recording once we publish it. The other logistical note was something that I may have forgotten. Oh, nope, I got it. So it's so we do have things like chat turned off for the presentation today, but we do have Q&A enabled. So if you go down to the activities in the lower right corner of your Google Meet, it's the one with all the different shapes. There is a Q&A section in there. If you do type questions into that as you have them, I will be checking that towards the end, and I do hope to get to questions and more of a question response format towards the end of the webinar. Now, before I get into our presentation, I actually want to share a resource with you all. So I'm going to come into our website. So yes, recommending our website as a resource seems pretty intuitive, but it is definitely something that I recommend you all check out if you haven't seen it already. From here, you can get to a lot of information about our product, like our pricing. You can go into the Kanoa MES section and learn about the different aspects of the platform. And this is a great opportunity to just share a lot of kind of what Kanoa provides to your stakeholders and give them a sense of how these things all work together. Our resources is super valuable with things like our blog, where we're posting educational articles, support, where we have things like our documentation portal. In resources, we have a live demo that's going to be an interactive version of but read-only version of a lot of what I'm showing you today. And if you're ready to contact us and talk about a potential project, there is the contact box right in here where you can schedule a personal demo or send us a message, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So Kanoa.ai is the website, highly recommended for all of your basics of Kanoa. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what you'll find on that website and what you'll learn about Kanoa over time. So really what we're trying to do at Kanoa is to develop continuous improvement solutions, right? Yes, we are making MES software to do that, but we like to say we don't just do MES for the fun of it. Most people don't. We really are doing this to drive continuous improvements in our plants and give all of these manufacturers, integrators, and analysts better tools to understand how their plant is performing, make more advanced and intelligent decisions, and then act on those decisions. Everything that we do and everything that you're going to see today is powered by Ignition. Kanoa only works within the Ignition platform. We are an extension to what they have. So if you're not familiar with Ignition by Inductive Automation, we definitely recommend that you check out too. It's an amazing SCADA and IoT platform. There's a reason that we build for it. And it is definitely something that we are happy to talk with you about as well if you're a new Ignition user. And if you're already an Ignition user, Kanoa is a really fantastic option for ways that you can expand your investment into Ignition and continue to get more value out of that platform with minimal engineering effort. Finally, our solutions are designed to fit into your manufacturing process. So we understand that MES software, we want to give you as much power as possible out of the box, but it does need to fit into both your business systems like your ERP and how that needs to see data, and your manufacturing processes, which are unique to you and your company, right? So MES software like Kanoa sits in this odd position where we do want to standardize as much as possible to give you value out of the box, but we also need to maintain that flexibility and give you all of the tools that you need to conform this software to make sure it fits your process and needs. So that's just a lot of our design philosophy and the way that we create a lot of the software to give you those tools out of the box while remaining open. But that's also where we leverage that power of Ignition, and they give you this great IDE and tool set for you to be able to continue to expand and customize what we're going to give you. So there's really two products that we're going to talk about today: Kanoa Ops and Kanoa Quality, and I'll refer to kind of both of those and any other thing that we make at Kanoa as Kanoa MES. So Kanoa Ops, sorry, let me go back a sec. These are two separate solutions. Both of them always include a MES database, our MES modules that connect to that database to your Ignition instance, and our Kanoa App Starter project, which is going to give you all of the configurations and tools and screens that you need to get going from day one, and that, again, you can expand to as needed. So you can buy Kanoa Ops and Kanoa Quality separately. They don't need to link together, but they also can work nicely together in themselves. And again, I hope to go over both of those today in the demonstration. So Kanoa Ops is more of a OEE and operations management tool. This is all about scheduling all of the work that you need to get done in your plant, defining all of your assets and your materials and how you're expected to run certain materials on certain assets, tracking all of that production throughout the day, and then reporting on it at the end of the day. Kanoa Quality, on the other hand, is more of a form creation and dispatching tool, really aimed to try to get a lot of your paper off of the shop floor and into more digital systems. So what you'll see in Kanoa Quality is a full in-application system for designing your quality forms, setting up all of your dispatch rules to say when those forms need to go out and be completed, collecting all of that data, and then letting you run tools like SPC on top of that data to get more insights. And when you get these products and want to get them into your Ignition system, this is something like what your overall system architecture is going to look like. So we have that Ignition platform layer at the bottom. This is going to come naturally in any Ignition installation that you do, and has things like your communication drivers and your security and your development environment and things like that. Now, the only Ignition module that we require outside of the base is Ignition Perspective. There are other modules that are commonly valuable. For example, the Ignition Historian is usually really valuable for troubleshooting, and you usually need a couple of extra data connectors like the CirrusLink MQTT module if you're consuming MQTT data, or something like the Web Services module to help you write back and forth to an ERP system. But technically, at its most fundamental, all we need is Ignition Core and Perspective. There are other modules that we do include with the product itself, including the BIJC calendar component and the Apex charts component, just to facilitate the development of our software. And those are both included in the installation when you get it. But really what we're getting here is these three boxes: our Kanoa database, our Kanoa modules, and our MES Ignition project. So as I mentioned earlier, that database is really kind of the brains of a lot of the operation here. We currently support Microsoft SQL, and that's really our go-to database, though we can support MySQL as well. We have been asked for a Postgres version. We're working on it. We would like to get one out. I do not have a date on that yet. But that database is really designed to be super fast, super efficient, small footprint, and totally open. So you can see all of the data that we are storing in there, and you can use it as needed to your heart's content. We don't recommend modifying that database too much because we're going to work with that as we go ahead and do a system updates and things. We might overwrite some of your changes, but the database itself and the data within there, totally yours to play around with. The Kanoa modules are what you install into your Ignition gateway and add something like 400 system functions into your Ignition installation to help with all of those communications to and from that Kanoa database. So that could be rights and configurations like setting assets or defining materials, but more commonly, you're going to be using these to retrieve data from the database. For example, we'll go through a demo later where I'm going to use Kanoa.events.get downtime reasons for this specific asset with this time period to get some key data from the database. Finally, all of this culminates into these Kanoa MES Ignition projects. So you get what we call Kanoa App as an out-of-the-box solution that we're going to give you along with those modules and database. And yes, technically you could implement Kanoa without using that project, but I don't know why you would. And because there's a lot of really, really good tools in there to get you started. And again, we're all using Ignition and Inheritance so that you can extend those platforms to your content. Actually, my next slide is more about some of those projects. So you can see that we have that Ignition platform at the bottom. We have Kanoa Ops and Quality. And then we have this inheritance path of Kanoa scripts, where we maintain some scripts that are commonly needed to be modified, like your ERP code, just to make that more accessible for you. Kanoa App, where the root of a lot of our projects are, Kanoa MES as an extra abstraction layer, and then your particular apps on top of that. So you can be inheriting our work and then using those features of Ignition to override screens or copy information that we have, or really do whatever you need to make sure that you are tuning this project for your application. The one other thing that I see that I mentioned on this slide that I didn't talk about earlier is Kanoa Core. So Kanoa Core is another module that you get with either Ops or Quality. It's free. And we just specify that and pull it out a little separately because that contains some of those core MES functions that you're going to need for any smart manufacturing system. So things like our theming, our user management, our navigation, our language support. All of those are in that Kanoa Core module that you then get for any other Kanoa MES solutions. Okay, so I'm going to get out of PowerPoint mode. We're going to get more into the demo mode here. I'll take a minute to remind everybody that there is going to be that Q&A section down in the activities in the lower right. I see that we have a question or two already, so that's great. I know it's working. Thank you so much. But if you do have a question for the Q&A, just click on that activities button in the lower right, go to the Q&A section, type in your questions. I'll get to them toward the end. Okay, so with that, let's share the application. So you should now be seeing my Kanoa foods and beverages with all of my different lines and my different asset hierarchies in here. I'm also not entirely sure how great this works in a presentation. Yeah, there we go. You'll see this is also all dynamic, right? So I can resize my screen. It's going to adapt to that as I go along. Again, we're using Ignition Perspective to drive a lot of this behavior and make things as mobile responsive as possible. We do have a mobile specific app for when that makes sense in certain instances, but we do try to make things accommodating for multiple screens using that power of Ignition. So first, let's actually start on that Kanoa Core layer that I talked about earlier. So some of those common functions that you're going to get in any Kanoa MES implementation. You can see up here, I can click on these settings, and I mentioned that we have things like themes. So I can switch this to forest or grape, or we have a couple of other pre-configured themes like that, dark mode, of course. But these are also, again, open systems that you're able to go ahead and make your own company theme as you need to. We do have our language support in here as well. We are taking advantage of Ignition's built-in translation tools to manage language support in our application. We have a couple out of the box. All of them kind of need to be expanded for your specific application, though. And I've heard our Korean is terrible, but the rest of these are supposed to be pretty solid. The other things are things like our navigation. So the way that we manage all of these different navigation hierarchies, which is all configurable in the application as well. I can go into my navigation menu configurations and I can turn on or off different parts of the application or add in entirely new custom screens that I have made as needed using these tools. And then the last one I'll show is our security. So what we do in Kanoa is we extend Ignition's security model. So all of your authentication is done through Ignition or through other parties, right? So the actual way that users log into the system is managed through Ignition, which gives you a lot of options to do things like Active Directory integration or hybrid modes or a lot of different things. Once you have logged into Ignition, though, Kanoa adds another layer on top of that where we are taking different users, we are putting them into groups, and then we are giving different users and groups different permissions on different assets. So, for example, these operators can do things like operate assets and edit operations, but they can't do a lot of our configuration activities. I'll also mention that a user can be in one role for one asset, but a different role for another asset. So if you have somebody who is maybe an administrator for your packaging area, they might still just need operator privileges over in a processing area for other things that they need to. Okay, so that is a lot of the Kanoa core functionality: language, themes, security, navigation. Now we're going to jump into Kanoa Ops, which, remember, is that OEE and production planning module, and we'll go through all of that, and then I'll jump into quality, and then we'll do more of the Ignition designer configuration stuff, and hopefully time at the end for Q&A. So here we are on that main page for our Kanoa Ops system. First thing you might notice is that we are following an ISA 95 style hierarchy throughout this, but it's not strictly ISA 95. So we do have things like our enterprise, food and beverages, with sites, with areas, with lines underneath them. But you can break this model if you want. If you wanted to, say, organize your different factories into business units, or if you wanted to have a sub cell of a line, we can manage all of that. We just kind of manage it all as a hierarchy in general. So in this case, I have my enterprise Kanoa Foods and Beverages and a different enterprise Kanoa Industries. We're going to focus on the Buffalo Bakery today. And we get a couple of nice pieces of information at a glance here. So first, again, we have that just logical structure of the Buffalo Bakery production area. We can see that all of these lines are running right now. I usually like to have one of them bolted. When I do a demo like this, you can see our thermo line down here, though, is throwing a fault. We also see what product they are currently running. We'll see the product name if it is just running unscheduled production, or a work order if it's running a work order. And you see these schedule icons here, which is to tell me that these lines are currently following their schedule, as opposed to this little operator icon, which says that somebody has gone in and manually overridden the mode for this asset. So that's kind of what we get at a glance at this screen, but let's kind of walk through more of a day in the life, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the work order system for how we download all of our orders from an ERP or enter them manually into Kanoa. Then we'll go ahead and schedule that work against certain assets. We'll see how you then manage those assets to run that work and collect the data that you need. And then finally, we'll go over a couple of reports that you get on the back end. So to start with the schedules, I'm going to come into Ops, I'm going to go into my schedules, and I'm going to look at my production orders. So production orders called all sorts of different things depending on the manufacturing environment that you are in, but these are the orders that you get to make stuff. No matter what you're doing, that's always something that every factory needs. So a lot of times we'll be downloading these from your ERP system. That's a very common interface point. Sometimes we'll just download them into this table. Sometimes we'll fully schedule them onto the lines as well. We're totally ready for both. But if you didn't, say, want to connect to your ERP, you also do have the flexibility to be adding in all of your production order information right here from this screen. You just type in your order number. You pick the finished product that you would want to run. This is going to be in a production mode as we're making something. You give it a quantity, you select your units, you give it a due date, and you decide its current status and go ahead and schedule that into the line. And we see our apple juice order right there. Once we have all of these different orders in, now we need to go and schedule these onto specific assets. So you can see I'm still on my Bake Line 2 asset, just because that was the last one that I clicked earlier. So that is the scope of this schedule. And you can see I have a very idealistic demo schedule set up here where we're doing non-production activities in the evenings. We are running certain production on just a regular cadence during the day, but let's also show some of the other scheduling things that we could do here. So for example, I could go into this block and I could delete what we are doing right now if I wanted. I could come into our work order scheduler here, and I can find one of the work orders for a product that runs on this line, and I can just drag and drop these into my schedule. It's going to use the expected production rate for that particular item to determine the length of that scheduled block. So you can see it's scheduled now for pretty much for multiple days, actually. I'm going to go ahead and delete that so I don't actually run that production. And we can also see how we can set up other recurring events here too. So this is where we're really taking advantage of the BIJC calendar components. So I can come in and say, I'm going to do a changeover from this time to this time, and we're going to do that every Wednesday for the next 4 weeks or something like that, right? So we have all those nice recurring rules. You can set these up just like your Google Calendar. There's different rules as we're trying to make that for a work order or production order versus unscheduled production, but again, a lot of flexibility in the system here. Before I get into production controls, there is one other thing when it comes to scheduling, which is shift schedules. So you can see I'm coming into Bakeline 2, and it doesn't have a shift schedule. That's because I need to click on this Show Inherited Shifts button, because if we don't have a shift schedule defined for a specific asset, we'll look to its closest parent for a shift schedule instead in the asset hierarchy. So this is really handy if, let's say, everything in the Buffalo Bakery runs on this 3-shift rotation pattern, except for a specific asset that maybe needs 4 shifts, or a different area that maybe runs just 5 days a week or something like that. So we can define different shift schedules at different levels of the hierarchy and use those appropriately. But this is really helpful too, because this is now capturing all of our other production data in the context of the current shift, and we'll see that come in handy when we run a couple of reports later. Okay, so now I've downloaded all of my work orders. I have those in the system. I've scheduled my production for these different lines. I have my shift schedule for all of that context as well. Let's talk more about kind of day in the life of an operator and what they're going to be working with. I'm going to come back to my home screen. And I'm going to pick on, say, our pack line 1 here. So this pack line 1 is on our asset operations screen. We like to think of this as the home base for everything that whoever is running pack line 1 needs to do in a day. So yes, there might be other SCADA and controls operations that they need to do, but if I'm responsible for making sure all of my Kanoa MES data is right for pack line 2, everything I need is right here. So I get some basic information on the current order being run. We're currently in not running a work order, so I don't get some of that data, but we do have some key elements over here, including the fact that we're currently running and have been for the last 50 minutes. One of the most common things we'll do from this screen is actually override the active run controls. So I'll go into the run controller here, and there's a couple of options that I have from this screen. So first is I can throw this machine instantly into any other non-production mode if I need to. Say that we've had an urgent order come in and we need to throw this into changeover and run something else. I'm just going to come into my run controller, click changeover, and I'm going to take this out of production mode and into changeover mode. One thing I'll show you in a little bit when we get into the configuration that you'll hear me talk about a couple of times is the difference between modes and states. So modes are what we as Kanoa are telling the equipment to do, and state is the feedback that we get back from that equipment telling us what it is actually doing. So we were just in a production state saying you should be making product. Now I've gone in as an operator and said, no, now we're going to do a changeover. So if the machine is, issuing downtime codes or things like that as we're going through our changeover process, that isn't getting attributed to some production event, because those downtime events that you're going to get in downtime states that you get, from the production events may be different, or you would care about those differently than you would during something like a changeover. So I've gone in, I've put this line into changeover. Now I need to get it up and running again. And there's a couple of different ways that I could do that. I could find a specific product that I know this product line runs and select that and start it. I could pick another work order that is still open, again, with the product this line runs, and run that. I could look at the things that are in my schedule, and I could pick any other scheduled events and run that. Or what I will do is I'm actually just going to hit end, in which case we're going to look back at our current schedule, see what this line is supposed to be running, and just resume that production event. So it'll take a second to do it, but I'll hit end, it'll go into idle, and then when the scheduling script hits, it'll look to its schedule and run the next thing. A couple of other things that we do from this screen. So downtimes and states is a very popular one. So I'm going to come in here. I'll show all downtime for the past 24 hours. And you can see each downtime state that we have gotten from the piece of equipment over this time period. I could also do things like open up one of these downtimes and I could recode it to a different downtime if I needed to. I could add a comment to communicate that to my team. We can also do things like split downtimes into multiple entries. I could also delete downtimes if we needed. This is also an interface to add completely new downtimes into the span if we want to as well. So in addition to downtimes, we can also do things like view the schedule from here. We do have some handy live dashboards, which are fun. This is nice if you maybe need to have a single thing up on your screen, just as you're generally monitoring the equipment. But the other really valuable screen that we get here is our run review. So this run review is going to look at every production event that's gone through the system and give us some key metrics, right? How much did we actually see for our in-feed and our out-feed and waste? When did the run start and stop? What was the total time? How much downtime did we have? What were my OEE metrics during this period? And remember earlier how I said that shifts would come in important? So we actually can see this as is right now by production run, which is generally, again, by that like scheduled block that we have. But we can also throw on this by shift toggle, which will then use our shift schedule and overlay that to break down if a production run ran across multiple shifts, how each of those shifts performed individually. I also do things, maybe I don't care about the non-production modes, I just care about the production. So again, a couple of nice handy features that we have on this screen to get you the data that you need. So speaking of getting data out of the system, let's talk about some of the other reports and metrics that you get as you go and run these projects. So I'm going to come back into our ops and our analysis here. I'm going to go into our downtime. This is just one of our more popular reports. So pack line 1 this week, let's run the downtime report. We can see here every category of downtime that we have, every individual reason. That's a good point, actually. So every downtime that we do have has a state type. So whether it is running, unplanned downtime, or planned downtime, it does also have a category like operations or quality that, again, you can create and assign yourself. We get a little pie chart by reason. We see a pie chart of how those fell by shift, again, using that shift context to help contextualize our data. And we have a little chart by category. Here's our stacked bar chart of how much downtime we had by reason per day. And down here, we have our table showing all of the data that we used to generate the report above, including a button to download all of this to Excel if you want to go and look at this yourself. One other report that I like to kind of show off in these, you can see we have a couple of different reports out of the box. I'm just kind of picking the ones that I think are good fun. I'm going to go run this for our whole production area yesterday. And this is a nice drill down report that gives you all of your assessments of your non-productive time, whether that be downtime or due to a speed loss or due to a quality loss, putting it all into a common metric of minutes to help you really dive into what your causes of non-productive time are. So first we get a little just chart of our time per mode for each of these assets, but down here we see all of our loss buckets. And I see that breakdowns or downtime is my #1 cause of losses. I can click on breakdowns over here to see downtime code by line stacked up, right? I can even click into one of these, say mix line 2, and just focus on their downtimes if I wanted to. We saw something similar to that though in the downtime report. Let's look into something like speed loss, which is more interesting. So this will tell us by product, if it wasn't running up to rate, which products we were having the biggest speed losses are. Similar with things like our quality losses, right? Which products led to the highest amount of quality losses. And once again, little download table for all of our data. One last thing that I'll show really quickly is that we are excited to kind of premiere these dashboard editors for you as well. So for example, I'm going to come into our downtime summary here, and this is really designed to be more of a ad hoc reporting tool for you to design your own dashboards and widgets for your team. So I'm doing things like picking my mix line here. I'm going to switch this back into edit mode. And I can just drag and drop the way that a lot of these reports work. I can select new areas and add in new reports as I need to. Let's see, what's a good one in here? Production card. Yeah, there we go. So again, you can see I'm kind of doing something quick and dirty, but we're providing you with a lot of new tools to be able to design some ad hoc dashboards and widgets all on your own too, which is really exciting. So let's talk a little bit about configuration. So this is going to be a brief preview of configuration. A little later, I'll kind of get more into the designer and show you how that works. But what we'll show right now is things like our asset tree. So as we were making, you can see all of these different operations. The context of the asset, the thing that we're running all these operations on was very important, came up a lot of times. This is where we're defining that ISA 95 hierarchy. So here's all of my mix lines. You can see I'm setting them as OEE enabled. When we do that, we're going to drop a UDT into the ignition designer for you to populate with the required data. Which, speaking of, there's really only 3 tags that we need to run everything that you've seen here. We need an in-feed count, we need an out-feed count, and a state. It can get more complicated than that. It can get simpler than that too if you don't care about a quality calculation. But it can really just be as simple as those 3 tags, and there's a lot of power that you get with configuring your system properly here in the application with minimal data from the equipment. In addition to setting this as OEE enabled, we go through and set all of its modes and states. Remember, we talked about that earlier. We have a couple of deep configuration settings. I won't get into all of those around how we set up those modes. And again, same for our states over here, where we have this master state list. And then what we do is we link individual states to an asset. We give it a specific PLC code to say, if you give me a 113 code on baseline 2, I put that into the setup state, and that's how we communicate that with the ignition system in your equipment. So if you did have fancy logic for, say, a first out fault or a highest priority fault, that is great. But we want you to do that in the PLC or ignition scripting layer and just give us the code that you want to report on. The other thing that we manage for Kanoa Ops is all of our materials. So you can see in here, we kind of have a folder and organization structure for defining all of these different materials that we can run through our lines. And then, similar to the way that we linked states to a specific asset, we link materials to a specific asset as well. So you can see here's all of these different types of dough that I run through my mixer. And I can open up one of these to see its standard rate, how we commonly run it. It's standard rate as in ideally how fast it can run. It's scheduled rate, how we often schedule it, what the proper period is for those rates, in feed, out feed, and waste units, and our package count. So that's really handy for conversions. My example is always, if you're putting a dozen eggs into a carton, you put it a 12-to-1 ratio here to say the 12 inputs equals 1 output. And that's how we do all of your OEE calculations correctly, accounting for those differences in units. So that's a lot of the configuration on ops. Again, I'll get back to that. We'll actually duplicate a line in a little bit and kind of show you how some of that works. But I do want to get over to Kanoa Quality. Again, quick pause here to remind people that there is a open Q&A in the application. So if you go into your application settings, there's a Q&A section there. See a couple of questions coming in. Thank you for doing that. I will make sure I get to those all within the course of this or at the end if I don't cover them naturally. So switching gears and going into Kanoa Quality. So remember where Kanoa Ops was all about OEE and scheduling and things like that. Kanoa Quality is all about getting those paper forms that you have into a digital format, dispatching them, and collecting all the data that you need. So this schedule screen is really kind of the main hub for going into Kanoa Quality. It shows you all of the checks that are currently outstanding. I can add a new check from here if I want, but let's just get straight into this and do one of our packaging changeover checks. This is supposed to represent, us taking off one type of packaging and putting on a new one for some piece of equipment in our packaging area. So I'll go into our packaging changeover test here, and you'll see I have a couple of basic kind of preliminary pre-check questions. Then we go ahead and we swap our product, and then we do a final checklist before we're done. I'll mention this is a very manual test. There's really three ways that we can get data. We can do totally manual tests like this. We can do semi-automated tests where there's some automatic data, some manual data. I'll show that next. We also have completely automated checks that work almost more like an events-driven historian. So this is that first type, though, totally manual. You can see I have some instructions showing up here. I'm going to say that, yes, this area is clear of debris. Yes, I have remembered to turn the machine off. Yes, my material to swap is ready to go. Those have all passed. I'm going to switch into my swap checks. Real quick, I'll say that you can see that we're making progress through the check as I go along up here. Things like that we have an estimated time to complete, the current status of the check, that it's missed, and I'm catching up a little bit. But let's get back to doing the check itself. So for example, what type of packaging am I taking off? Let's say we're taking off pumpernickel bread packaging. And it asked me what the previous roll weight was. And notice it's giving me some engineering tolerances up here. So it won't take a value like 200 if I try to do that. It's going to reject it, giving me that that is lower than the lower entry limit. And if I do something like, say, 375, it's going to end up in the yellow here, or 315, because I mistyped that. So that's even in the red. So we get that visual feedback, and it'll show me if I click into it where we're falling in these tolerances. So say my next packaging, I'm going to put on wheat bread, and I'm going to say that I'll use our calculator that pops up this time. That's going to weigh 635 pounds. Great. I go into our final checklist. Did I remember to take all my tools out of the machine? Yes. Did I turn it back on? Yes. I can review all of my data before I go ahead and submit this. Then I'll go ahead and submit. So again, very manual test, but you can see where this could have been a check sheet before where people need to go and fill out and check all these forms off. Now we are moving that into the digital format with those dispatching rules around it too. So another way I can do this is I can add a check manually. So I'm going to do one of our dough dump checks where I'm, say, dumping a big bunch of dough out of one of our mixers, and we're going to get some automated data for this one. So I need to pick an asset to say where I am dumping this dough from, so it knows to get the right tags for that particular mixer. So I'm going to point this to mix line 2. I'm going to add this dough dump check. It immediately becomes due within the next 10 minutes, so we're going to get on that and do it right now. And the first thing we have here is a get data button. There's two ways that we can get this automatic data. We can, the second the test is issued, go out, grab that information, and then just bring it back into the report. Or we can do it this way, where we wait for an operator to get there. They say, okay, I'm here. Now take this measurement. It runs out, it grabs those 2 points, and it stores them into the form. There's also some manual checks here. How much did that dough weigh when you dropped it? Give me 3 different temperature readings. Okay, again, I'll review all of that data before I submit it, and then I will. But notice that this didn't go directly into the approved state because this check requires a sign-off. I am also an approved sign-off person, so I can go ahead and approve this test. Not best practice for your implementation, but efficient for demos, so that's how it is. So now we have those 2 tests approved and in the system. I had mentioned a third way to get data, though, as well, which is to do totally automated tests, right? So one example of that is our fermentation temperature check. And I'm going to run this for all last month, the whole month of September. Remember how I said that database is really good? Let's see how good it is. That was pretty fast. Okay, so this is pulling 3 points of data every 30 minutes for the entire month of September. So with 50 rows and 3 data points per row, that pulled 42 pages of data. So a lot of data right there. Again, really just a testament to that open, well-designed database that we have. So this is grabbing all these different zone temperatures, and this is really great for showing off some of our SPC as well. So I'm going to run my SPC analysis on this. We see a trend of that data over time. I can pick the SPC rules that I want to apply. And then I can highlight all my Rule 1 violations, my Rule 2, my Rule 2s, my Rule 6s. So we have all those options there available to you. You can also chart all of this on a histogram if you're also interested in that type of data. So I mentioned how efficacy of these checks is really important, and we do have these dispatching systems. We do some analysis on the efficacy of those checks. So that temperature check that we just mentioned, right, that just goes on automatically. So we can see it has a 2,000 approved checks in the month of September for us doing that. However, our packaging changeover is a very manual check. So we can actually see that how many times I have actually done that versus how many times I've missed it over the month of September as I've been doing demos. So again, we have these tools in here to try to help you understand how these checks are being performed and make sure they're being effective. The last thing I'm going to show for quality is that, again, a lot of what I was showing you is configured here within the application without you ever needing to go to the Ignition designer. Really, the only time you need to get into Ignition for Kanoa Quality is to make tags available to the system for things like those fermentation temperature checks or getting other automated data. But if I go into something like that dough dump check, we can see we have some metadata around the check itself. We can add in some overall information. We can attach PDF files to it. This is where I said that this test required a sign off. We put it in a folder. Since this test does require an asset, I'm saying which assets are valid for it. We also have some tricks in here, like, for example, if we wanted to issue one check sheet automatically if something were to fail into this one, or if we wanted to trigger some notification pipeline on a check failure as well. But the checks and the triggers are where it really takes off, right? So this is where we're defining those different tabs that we have at the top. I can add a new tab right now if I wanted to. And while we're in here, I can even go and add in a new check, right? I'll say webinar check. We're going to put it in the demo group. It is going to be a check. It is going to be a float. I'm going to enable it. We're going to require it. I can put in instructions here. We can say that we need multiple measurements of this. Assigning attributes is how I would actually assign this to engineering tolerances or data points, which we're not going to get into in the demo today. I can do things like our units. And I can pick how people are actually going to put in this data as well. So I could do a number with a certain pick list if I want. I can check that pick list here before we put it out into the field. So again, a lot of flexibility in how we design all of these checks right here in the application. Let's go and delete those before I make some bad data by accident. You can also see, again, I'll go and say our drop check here. You can see this is where I took the 3 measurements for this data point. I can look at our auto checks and we can see that this is where I'm mapping in a specific attribute to this data point. Finally, we do our triggers. So this test is only manually triggered, but we do have other options to trigger a test. It could be on a timed interval, like that fermentation check. It could be on a product change or a mode change. We could do it based on a tag if you'd like. And then we also define a lot of the tolerances around that. How long is a test due before it's overdue? How long is it overdue before it's missed? And things like that, all defined here within this trigger editor as well. So there are a couple of things I did not really get to show today. Again, I don't get into maybe tying in specific data points into quality. We do have a lot tracking feature within Kanoa Ops now that is in beta and going to be released very soon. Excited to show that off a little bit more. But as far as the things in the application, that is a great summary of where we are at now. I see a couple more questions coming into the Q&A. That's great. But what I do want to do before I get to those questions is I want to do something we don't always do in these sessions, which is get into the designer a little bit and show you some of those tricks as well. So what I'm going to do, you might see my screen go away for just a minute as I present something differently to get to my designer. Okay, so you should see my whole screen in just a minute. I'm not sure that that's loaded up just yet. There we go. Okay, so let's do a couple of things with this Buffalo Bakery just real quick to show how you can make a new asset and how we get some of the data using the Kanoa APIs. So first, let's go into our asset management here, into that asset tree editor. And we're going to make new assets in 2 different ways. So first of all, let's organize our work somewhere. I'm going to come into our Buffalo Bakery. I'm going to make a new area here. So I'm going to add an asset. We're going to call it packaging. I'm going to set this up as a area. I'm going to put it second in our sort order. I'm going to enable it. And now we have our packaging area. And let's move our 2 pack lines into that area. So everything that we do in Kanoa is all based on index. So if you need to rename assets, drag and drop them, move them to new areas, you take all of your data with you. In fact, if I just go back to the home page right now, you'll see I have a packaging area and those 2 lines have already moved, and I can go in and operate these. Nothing has changed besides where they fall in the hierarchy. Let's also come into, so we're going to go back in there. And let's make 2 new packaging lines. So first, I'm just going to duplicate pack line 2. We do just have a duplicate asset function. It's going to take a little bit to crunch the numbers, but this is really handy to really do a full asset copy. You'll see that as we made that, I'm just going to rename that pack line 3. Excellent. You'll see all of its modes, all of its states, things like that copied over from the original asset, which is really handy if you're doing a 1-for-1 swap. We're not doing things like moving over the actual tag mappings and stuff, so I'll show you how we do that in a bit. But you don't always need to duplicate assets. I'm here to show you how easy this is. Let's go ahead and we're also going to do pack line 4. I'm going to make that a line. I'm going to OEE enable it and make it enabled. And let's save that asset. Oh, sorry, didn't put it alphabetically. Oh, that's why. Put it real late. There we go. Great. So now it didn't copy over anything like our modes and states from the previous instances, right? Because I just made this from scratch. Let's give this some of our basic modes that we need. Say I'll link all of these here. So I'm selecting the relevant modes for this equipment and linking those modes to the asset. And then I'm coming into the states as well. I'm just going to take these top 4 basic states here. I'm just shift selecting to select a whole bunch, linking those to my asset as well. And you can see it's just auto assigning some PLC codes and things like that to give us some baseline data. But now I do have a running code and a couple of other default state operations for this equipment. Now let's jump into the Ignition Designer as promised. So I wish I could make it a little bigger for you, but we're all focused down here in the tag browser, where if I go into, you can see we have our packaging area now. And you can see, in addition to pack line 1 and 2, we have 3 and 4. Let's map up pack line 3 and 4. I'm going to link these both to the same simulated asset that we have, just for convenience now. But just so that you know, what we're going to be doing here is, you see that we have these inputs with those in-feed counts, out-feed counts, states, and a couple of other potential inputs that you could be providing our system. This is all I'm really going to be mapping in right now. You didn't see that. So if I come in here into my parameters, actually, I'm going to go and grab the path first. So I'm just going into our simulator logic here. You can see I have a pack line 3 simulator. I'll make a pack line 4 simulator too. I'm just going to copy this path, and all these really are again just inputs that are just on a simulator and tick up themselves as every minute to simulate production. But this is really all that you would be doing too on your end, right? As you would just be doing reference tags or some other type of derived tag to get to these main pieces of data. I'll come back into these 2 areas here. So I'm going to point this MQTT path to pack line 3. I'm going to point this MQTT path to pack line 4. And you'll see that we have just these inputs and outputs. Now these are mapped. These are just reference tags that are looking at the right type of data. Coming back into our application, I'm going to be able to run pack line 3 from scratch, but not 4 just yet. So if I go into pack line 3, I see its run controls. It's currently in an unknown state. It just kind of needs to get knocked into something to see where it is. So I'm going to change over it. It'll take that. I'm going to look at all the products. I'm going to pick one of these. I'm going to run it. And just like that, we are up and running with pack line 3. So that was, again, the admittedly easy one because I just duplicated an existing asset. I can't quite do that on 4 yet because I can put it into a different mode, but it doesn't have anything to run because I didn't actually go and set up any products for this, right? Let's just do that real quick. I think it'll just take me a minute. Material management, production rates. I'm on pack line 4 already. Great. I'm going to link an item to an asset. 4. There we are. Let's go into our finished products and link all of our output bread packages to it. I did the link there. And then again, just shift selecting all of these and editing and putting in some default values that I know work well with that simulator. So loaves, cases, 1, save. Great, excellent. Now I should be able to run pack line 4 again. So I'm going to come back here where we're in our engineering mode. I go into our run controller. Now I have a bunch of products or any work orders that were involving those products, and I can get this line up and running as well. Okay, so hopefully that shows you, again, how easy it is once you have those key pieces of data to get something configured and up and running in Kanoa. Last thing, and then I will get a couple minutes for questions. But people usually ask me, and we don't usually get to, how do you actually use the Kanoa APIs to get some more data? So what I have up here is one of our dashboard widgets to get automate downtime minutes or do those downtime charts. Here, I'll show you what this looks like in the app. So it's these downtime minutes. Oh, I don't have any downtime on pack line 4. We just made pack line 4. So it's these charts here that we are kind of seeing the configuration for back here. And you can see, so I'm passing in a couple of parameters. In this case, we always name everything in value and then have a Python dictionary of things after that. So we're actually using the asset path to figure out what asset we are pointing to. So we have a couple of different filters in here that we're getting from different page elements or other parameters that we pass in to filter this data properly. But when we call Kanoa, we're just getting this data in here. And the only reason this is as complicated as it is that we have that drop down where you can slice and dice your downtime data in a lot of different ways. But you can see what we're doing is we're saying that if you want your downtime by reason, call system.kanoa.events.get downtime summary with this asset, this start date, and this end date. If you want it by category, you're calling a slightly different function. If you want it by interval, you're calling a slightly different function. And we're just kind of doing those different things to make sure that we're getting the data for you in the way that you want to see it, which is, again, coming back in here. Here is our current thing where we're going by reason, and here's the data set that we get back. But if I go ahead right now and swap this to by category, we just pull a different data set and chart that. And if I do it by interval, we get a totally different section and just display that, all within the same chart and widget and things like that. And again, just to pull up that code, all of this also is kind of fully done with IntelliSense and things like that. So you can see all of our documentation right here in the app. And again, that is where the docs.kanoa.ai can come in really useful as well as we download, document each of those functions there. Okay, so with that, I am going to switch this back into the application. And let's see if we have any questions. So give me just a minute. Again, to swap around my screens. Great. Okay, wow, got a bunch of questions here. I'm not going to get to all of these. I will do my best. So we had a question around what ignition modules are required to enable and run Kanoa. So first, the Kanoa modules, obviously, right? So you do need to buy the Kanoa modules to run our application, but Perspective is the only module that we do require. I do have a chart in here I showed with some more of that information. Again, that's on our website too. How are the downtime reasons collected? Another question in there. So that was using that state configurator that I showed. So again, if I'm going to show that a little bit more, what we do is so we have a master list of every single state that you can register in the system, including all of your unplanned downtimes. And then per asset, we link those states together and you provide a PLC code to the state tag in that UDT, and we report on that appropriately. Again, that's kind of it at its most simple. And in a nutshell, it can get more complicated than that, but that's the default behavior. Okay, next question. What are the resolution of OEE calculations? That's a really good question. So you saw me run a couple of reports by interval, right? So that's a kind of it depends type of thing. So you can set up different data resolutions for different pieces of data. We're doing like tag change scripts for a lot of this. So for example, when we see your in-feed count tag change, we'll run a tag script to then look at the delta and commit that into our database to maintain all of your OEE counts. So if you wanted to change the resolution of that, you could change the way that that input tag responds. Maybe you want to scan that every minute. Maybe it's every 10 minutes. So a lot of flexibility kind of in how you do that. So yeah, it's just kind of a matter of what data resolution we have coming through Ignition and how you want to see that on the back end. Yeah, so I hope that answers that question. That's a good one. Next question I have is, can we receive the product lists and product properties from ERP? Yes, absolutely. I should have mentioned that earlier. That's a good one, Francis. Thank you. So where you saw me get to that material management list here, this is a very common thing for us to be downloading from an ERP system, including how these are linked to specific assets and their expected rates. In fact, we usually even have hooks in there of we have all the proper data, where if we get a work order with a product we haven't seen before, that will automatically add it to the registry, but then you need to add in some of the rates and things like that too. So yes, very commonly ERP downloading. All right, I have 3 more questions in 3 minutes. Let's see, 2 minutes, see how I do. Is there a global quality test view where we can see all of the data there with control limits in the same view? Maybe. Just a second. If not, we could certainly make one, right? But what I'm gonna do to check that out is I'm gonna go to our do dump check. I'm gonna do that. Did I do that last month? We did. So you can see I have the values in here, and if I show some of the other stuff, so yeah, no, I'm not showing the engineering tolerances on that, and I could see that being a little complicated since it changes by asset, but we certainly have the data. We could figure out how to do that for you guys. So good question there. For the production reports, is there something available if we needed to do our own reporting? Good question. So Power BI has been a little more challenging for us than we thought because we do have a lot of stored procedures that we're doing to run and do a lot of our analysis. So if you're able to call stored procedures in whatever tool you're doing, like SSRS, yes, absolutely. And again, that SQL table is completely open, so you have access to try to compute everything yourself. Though, again, we designed those stored procedures for a reason, and we don't really want you developing a different answer for the truth. So the answer is yes, kind of. It's complicated, but also you do have a lot of great reporting capabilities here in Ignition. Finally, I have a question around the licensing and pricing model for Kanoa, something I really didn't talk about too much. But here at the very end, an excellent thing to end on. Again, I'm going to the pricing section of our website. So we follow the Ignition model generally when we do our licensing. So we do an unlimited license per gateway. If you can run 5 plants off of one gateway, congratulations, you might just need 1 license. But you also could, based on data resolution rules or the way that your plant set up, you might have 4 Ignition gateways that make sense for your specific plant, in which case it would be 4 licenses, right? So we are completely licensed by gateway. It is a then flat fee, unlimited users, unlimited tags, assets, things like that. And it is $20,000 per gateway for Kanoa Ops and $25,000 for Kanoa Quality. We recommend buying the 20% annual support and maintenance fee on top of that for upgrade protection and access to our support lines and things like that. And if you liked what you saw today, you want to learn more about Kanoa, and you want to schedule a follow-up demo or ask me more questions, go to the contact section of our webpage, fill out something there. I'm happy to meet with you and chat through that. Oh, actually, I did have one question come at the very end, but I think I answered it. So it really depends on your plans. It really could be, does it need to be on every gateway for a site, or could it just be on a front-end gateway? It needs to be on every gateway. Sorry, the question is, do you need to get a Kanoa license for every single gateway in a site, or could it exist just on one? You need it for anything that's going to run Kanoa. So anything that's using our system functions, calling up reports, entering in data, any of your Kanoa terminals and the gateways that run from those would need a license. If you're in a very unique situation where you do have multiple gateways at your site for some reason, we're happy to look at into that with you to see if that licensing model really doesn't make sense for your situation. We're happy to talk about it. Okay, so I ran a little bit over, but we started a little bit late too. Thank you everybody so much for joining in today. I love all the questions that we got over here. Again, check us out at kanoa.ai. Fill out a contact form there if you would like to follow up with us. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We look forward to getting in touch with you more soon. Thanks again.